Welcome back to Rocky Mountain Residential, a monthly podcast produced by MCM Collective. I'm Christine Cavalier.
I'm Kelly McBartlett.
And I'm Blake McBartlett. And we have a new guest with us today.
My name is Anna Yost, and I have recently joined MCM Collective. The last 13 years, I've been a nurse, specializing in pediatric cancer and bone marrow transplant, as well as specialty home infusions, but have always been really passionate about real estate and have been able to coincide those careers with, patient advocate. Now I can advocate for my clients. I'm an active listener. And just really excited to be joining MCM Collective. I'm learning from the best over here and ready to take on all the new challenges that come with real estate.
Learning from the best, you already are the best.
Well, welcome, Anna. So we are really excited to have you be on our team for sure. So today, I thought maybe we would talk about sustainability because it's such a big topic. What do you guys think?
Sounds good.
Yeah. So sustainability and climate change being such a focus, not only here in our country, but around the world. How do you think all that is playing into residential real estate?
Gosh, Christine, that's such a big topic. It seems
We have the big topic. We don't like to take on little topics.
I'll do the big ones. I think when I look at this, it really is kind of broken into two areas globally, because in other parts of the world, sustainability is a huge focus, with governments really investing resources into it and big developers taking on sustainable building practices like new building materials and more environmentally friendly ways of managing energy. Locally, it's interesting, to say the least. It seems like it's mostly driven by building code. And sometimes some communities are up to speed and sometimes they're not. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel the same way?
I do, and I think the elephant in the room is often climate. When we start talking about like sustainability and how things are going to be, because we're building things that are supposed to last, right?
Yeah.
And where we live is changing every day. Every summer, there seems to be a little bit more fires. We have more floods than we have before. And I think it's really shifting our Northern Colorado market, especially as we head up to the mountains.
Yeah, I was recently reading about Germany and the Netherlands and Sweden have really been like taking on the heading it up, and they have been doing a really good job of getting like residential to get to net zero building codes and things like that. And I do feel like we're really lucky in Colorado that we are, in the U.S. taking, that spearheading that charge a little bit. But there's always improvement to be doing.
Yeah.
Smart. Also, like building materials are changing too, in terms of like what materials are we using? Are we using brick? Are we using wooden stick? Are we using concrete?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're
Or
absolutely.
steel.
Oh, steel. Yeah. There's so many different ways to build sustainably, just to even like reduce the amount of materials we're using over time and replacing materials over time. So if you're using more robust materials on the exterior of your building, that can certainly help to improve sustainability. It's interesting though, when, locally, I mentioned that it's usually driven by builders and building codes. And when projects are taken on by architects or builders that are very sustainable or net zero, like you just mentioned, the market has to absorb it. And not always, because it's above building code, not always does the market absorb it. So you almost have to build those types of sustainable building practices into your budget and make it equitable. And what do you think about that?
Well, I agree with all that. I do think that even though it might not be code, like you said, it's going to be a little bit more, it's definitely going to be more expensive to build. And then you have to build that into your budget, which makes the home more expensive. However, I do have clients, and I'm sure you all do too, that really are focused on sustainability. And it is important to them. They want to live in a green home. They don't want to contribute more to climate change or, anything else that's not green. And so I think there is definitely a subset of the market of home buyers that really are looking for that. So I do think that can be an advantage for a builder. And I think those people are willing to pay that extra. I kind of think back to when electric, EVs were first out. They were much, much more expensive than a gas-powered vehicle. and people really didn't necessarily get the value back out of it. Like you always do that cost versus return on your investment. So I think there definitely is a market for that. Definitely. I wanted to go back to one other thing you said earlier, though, about, like what types of materials, saying that looking at the exterior of a building and maybe using materials that are more durable, that last longer. What would be some examples of those materials?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Something that I've read about recently, I've not seen executed, but insurance companies are starting to require or test different fire-resistant products being used on the exterior of homes. So they say that if you build a 5-foot moat of concrete around the property, around the house, it can prevent the home from burning down. In terms of additional durable products that you would use on the exterior, these are products that don't need paint over time. They can be a fiber panel that is durable for 50 or 100 years. That is your exterior siding. There's lots of things like that I've read
very
about.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was reading quite a bit about the fiber siding, living around here and the fire risk. Insurance companies may start requiring stuff like that down the line, So I think kind of, Christine, like you were saying, there being a subset of buyers like that, I think it's going to slowly evolve to these new requirements. So, it's just, do you want to be ahead of the game or just kind of be moving along?
Yeah, I think back to what I was point about like the cost. I think when people hear the word sustainability, they think of like green homes. And so still, I think sustainability can also mean like affordability. I think it could almost be a synonym. I think in Texas, they're doing like 3D printing homes with mud. And it's not only like sustainable in terms of like being green, but it's also really affordable.
Right.
So I think obviously our climate's a little bit different than Texas.
Yes.
And I think sustainability will be different in all of our different climates. But I thought that was really interesting what Texas is doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's a really good point, that it doesn't always need to be more expensive to build sustainably. So I am really glad that you brought that up. How do you think it impacts the value of the home going forward?
And that's an interesting question. I kind of looked at the example of solar panels. So, if we were talking about this conversation 10 or 15 years ago, people were installing solar panels on their homes, and it was certainly helping their cost. But it was difficult for the market to absorb that and take on that cost. Appraisers weren't giving value to solar panels. And fast forward to today, that's not the case. Many appraisers will give dollar for dollar value for solar panels, and it increases the value of your home just because it is such a valuable resource for that future homeowner.
Right.
What other things are you guys seeing in terms of how it impacts value?
I would agree. I think dollar for dollar. I think also how you talk about the cost of sustainability or going more green, you're kind of like paying in advance. So like pay for this initial investment now, and it's going to save you money in the long run.
Right.
I think how you phrase that and how you market that type of product to other buyers is really important to show that value.
Yeah. What are some more kind of sustainable practices or sustainable ready?
Sustainable.
Staple
Resources.
Yeah, right. I got it. Things that are put in home. We talked about solar. We've talked about building materials. What other things are we talking about when we talk about sustainability and environmentally friendly house or home building products?
I think,
Practices.
honestly, I think this became really more common in commercial spaces and the certification to buildings, like LEED certified. And I think through the commercial development industry, really pushing in charge of like certifications, I think the residential builders have kind of caught on to that, especially here in Fort Collins. We're not in Fort Collins, we're actually in Loveland, but in Northern Colorado as a whole, we're seeing those terms being marketed to the general public, like certified. And a lot of Fort Collins building codes is leaning more into that.
Yeah.
And what that means.
Well, I think another thing that we're also seeing, and this I think does come from the commercial world a bit, but it's also, there was a federal act passed recently that gives a lot of dollars towards efficient, energy efficient building and retrofitting. For instance, with heat pumps, which are extraordinarily efficient in most climates. Not every climate, when it gets ultra cold, does a heat pump work really well, but in most climates, including where we're at, it does.
Right.
incredibly more expensive than a traditional furnace. But there are federal grants that work towards that to help offset that cost. And they both cool and heat. They can also be applied to water heaters. And so we'll likely start seeing a lot more of this come about in the future generations.
And it's interesting that you bring up the heat pump. Our house is 20 years old, and we're getting ready to redo our HVAC system. And we actually got a quote to put in heat pumps. And surprisingly, it's not that much more expensive now. I mean, I think it depends upon, obviously, the contractor that you use and the products that you're using. But where it gets when I talked to him about it to learn more about it, what I learned was there are two different types of heat pumps. And not to get really technical, but when you drill, I'm not going to say it right, but like vents or something into the ground to use the geothermal from the ground, those are much more efficient and can heat when it is really cold outside. Those are the ones that are super crazy expensive. But most of them, for a general home use, the unit sits outside, not as expensive. So yeah, that's another really great example.
I think another more broadly used or just more commonly used is like the smart thermostat, like making your home a little smarter. I know plenty of people that use like the Nest smart thermostat, just so it's being used when you're home or not being used when you're not at home. And I know that Northern Colorado, they do provide, certain rebates and things to customers that are using those to be a little bit more energy efficient.
That's a good point. We even have builders that are installing Nest and or smart thermostats by standard.
Right. And I think that is in some areas building code now, even. Same with insulation code has changed a lot. Like a lot of the codes to do with sustainability and energy efficiency have been updated over the last, decade or so. Whereas, maybe R15, which is the efficiency of the insulation was code before. Now it's like R45 or R50, right? Another interesting thing, and I don't know if any of you have done this with your clients, a lot of the municipalities, at least in our area, do have organizations that are able to go do an energy efficiency audit. Have you guys ever had any clients do that?
I've not had a client that has done it, but I've heard it's an amazing resource and usually done for free by those cities, like you just mentioned. And what I've heard from people that I've talked to in the industry and other folks out in the community is that they'll analyze your entire house and give you a priority list of what is the most important thing to focus on if you're going to do a remodel. So is it windows? A lot of people focus on windows, and sometimes those are not even the biggest impact you can make on your energy efficiency. It might be insulation before windows. Certainly windows should be addressed at some point, but it's super interesting.
Out with clients, I seem to always ask the question, like, what about my electric vehicle? And making sure the electrical panel is newer to handle the 220.
Yeah.
And like, where's the nearest 220? Can we put one in? And with City of Fort Collins, that is now code that there has to be a tag to it ran in the garage. It's definitely one.
Yeah, I think most of the municipalities are going that way now to have that EV charger there, or at least a conduit so that you can add it for sure.
Sometimes I'm getting questions from my clients about where do I invest money to make the biggest buck for return, both so I can take advantage of it now, but also that the market will respond to.
Right.
What are you all seeing in terms of that, or how are you advising your clients on what things they should be investing in?
It's really, I'm glad you brought that up because I just had a client who listed a home in Old Town Longmont, and those homes are not energy efficient. Built in 1898.
Beautiful.
Really, really cute. Lots of charm. They're fantastic. So we did talk about that. And we did have an energy efficient audit person come out and look at it. And you're right. Like, windows in that case definitely were recommended because they had those old single pane wood frame windows. And there was just like, it might as well just have the window open, right? But they also talked about insulation. So they blew cellulose insulation in, which is also interesting because that insulation itself is a sustainable product because it's using recycled paper, which is really cool, right? So it's like a double benefit. They talked about possibly doing the insulation in the walls where you drill all the holes. They decided not to do that. But Yeah, very expensive, right? So, but there were a lot of things that they did to update, that were simple and easy, and definitely made an impact on the resale of their home. Because a lot of people, when they're going into those types of areas that are very charming, but it is a big question for a lot of buyers. It's like, well, this house is really cute. I love it. But what's the energy going to be like, right? So, and they did also put a heat pump in.
Oh, yeah. I think Scott Home Inspections is one of the vendors I recommend. They call out these things without kind of doing like this is green, this is like the sustainability. Like they comment if the windows are single paned. They comment if there's like 5 inches of insulation and there really should be X amount. And they're calling out all these efficiencies.
Right.
And they have been for a while, which I think is great.
It's true.
And not in like an alarming way, but just in terms of like, hey, this is just something to be aware of.
Yeah.
I'm also telling people, think about solar panels. There are financing programs, or if you can fund them up front, they're great. They reduce your bills. Induction ranges are even now being made by Wolf and Thermador, and they're starting to become accepted by the general public. And like you just said, heat pumps. If you're going to be replacing your water heater or your furnace and AC system, you should really consider a heat pump.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. I just had another thought that went right out. Any thoughts? I need more coffee today.
Detail, it's Monday.
Oh, yeah, I know. It popped back in my head. Do you think sustainability, gosh, I cannot say that word.
We'll do it for you.
Sustainability. Do you think that will become the norm? I mean, do you think we're going towards that where it will just be part of every home and what every home buyer experiences?
I think to some degree it has to, because, like we've mentioned or alluded to a couple of times, our weather patterns are changing and they're getting more dramatic. And so it's almost twofold. It goes hand in hand, sustainability and kind of, long-term resistance to the elements.
Right.
I think that if we're going to be able to continue to have insurance, we're going to have to start adopting some of these processes. So my prediction is it will become the norm.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I kind of think so too. And I think, we have people that we have buyers like we were talking about that are going to be really interested in that and the longevity. And so I think some of these older homes, like you were saying, are going to be making these changes. And I also was just kind of recently reading about people are deconstructing homes. So instead of like demolishing homes, they're kind of recycling. So if you're going to be doing extensions to your house or different renovations, they're going to be trying to keep some of those parts so that they can continue using them. And then as well as can add some eco-friendly, energy efficient hands along with it.
I'm glad you brought that up, Anna, because there are definitely municipalities. I know in Boulder, when you're deconstructing anything, you're doing an addition, modifications, they require you recycle all of those materials. You cannot just throw them away. So I think that is also becoming more of the norm.
I think that's showing we're taking slow steps that I think sustainability is going to be, that tier. Like we said, it, is going to be maybe more expensive at the start, but will provide longevity.
Yeah, and it just made me think too of one other thing. We just redid our kitchen last year. And, we were getting rid of all these old kitchen cabinets and countertops. And there's actually companies now that will come. It was great. A company came and took all of it out for us. They didn't charge us, but in return, they get to sell that material. So there's really some really cool, interesting business opportunities coming up from that also.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That is very cool. Yeah.
Well, thanks again for watching Residential Rocky Mountain Podcast. We look forward to seeing you next time.